Okay, so this is going to be a very interesting conversation for me, particularly, and for the people listening as well, because you're the first person on the pod who's actually gone through that exit journey as well.
One fine day you wake up and it's not there anymore.
Shabbir's startup journey was a wild roller coaster, scaling fast, facing challenges, and making bold moves, building a food empire with a high stakes exit. Yet, the adventure is just beginning.
Most places in the UK, you probably have a chippy curry house, bad Italian and bad Chinese. Me and my friend Dinesh, we sat in a pub, literally Christmas Eve 2019, thinking about wouldn't it be great if we built a platform like Just Eat or Deliveroo, cooking, fresh homemade meals, a lot of them from ethnic backgrounds. Timing is super critical. And then in March 2020, we all know, the entire world turned upside down. All of us still, wanted to have amazing, great food.
So then the shift.
A lot of, I would say, COVID businesses had boomed during COVID and then just completely crashed. All of the costs of the ingredients went up. Gas prices went up. Operationally, it was a nightmare. Once you hit that downward spiral, it just goes from bad to worse, isn't it? And then we had to unfortunately say goodbye and move on, I guess.
If you were to go back now, what would have you been doing differently?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I never actually wanted to.
Shabbir, so what's harder? Starting a business or selling a business?
Starting a business is a lot harder than selling a business, for sure.
Let me rephrase. What's more emotionally wrecking? Starting a business or selling a business?
I think selling a business is more emotionally wrecking because, you've built something up, for so many years, given your absolute heart and soul to it. And then, one fine day you wake up and it's not there anymore. And we sort of exited last year, May, June, and it's probably like every single day I'm thinking about it. And I think it's quite important to maybe start another business soon, because otherwise there's a lot of hangover which goes on from your previous life or your previous business. So yeah, it's definitely, I would say, absolutely emotionally wrecking not being part of a business, especially if you built it up from day one.
Okay, so this is going to be a very interesting conversation for me, particularly, and for the people listening as well, because you're the first person on the pod who's actually gone through that exit journey as well. But we're going to come to that. But first, let's talk about your journey. You're obviously in the UK now, but where did you start? Where you're from, and how did you land up in the UK?
Yeah, so I grew up in Mumbai, or Bombay as it was called in those days, and I was a growing up geek. So always I started programming from the age of like 7, 8 or so. Then funnily enough, when the time came, going to university, I was meant to do a computer science degree, but the dot-com crash had just happened 2001, and I, taking admission in 2002. So I was advised to take up an electronics degree. So I did that, but I still ended up doing most of the programming tasks within that degree, and less of the electronics bits. So and then I got a job as a software engineer, and that's kind of where my UK journey started. So I was in India. I got my job in Pune, and fundamentally, my first role, my real job, was in Cambridge.
Oh,
So this is going back maybe about 17, 18 years. And that's how I came to the UK. I was here only for a few months, then I went back. And then, I got another job before I came back to the UK, in like close to 14 years ago.
wow. So you're a long way from home, but it's been a long time also. So now has UK become the home, or you still go back and forth?
Yeah, I go every now and again, when there's sort of family functions and important gatherings and things. But otherwise, I've got children here who go to school here. So very much, sort of well bedded into the UK ecosystem.
And at that time, was it a opportunity that you were actively looking for? Like you wanted to exit India and, move out, migrate, or it just happened to be that, something came along and
Yeah, interestingly enough, I never actually wanted to come to the UK. So from the time I was a teenager and probably highly influenced by American sitcoms, I always wanted to go to the US. So I'm like, one of those people from about 13, 14, built out of life to move to America. And believe it or not, I still haven't been to America.
no
One
way.
day. Yeah, but like, I joined this company out of university, which used to do IT services for a lot of businesses in the UK. They were actually a BT partnership group as well. So very UK focused. And, as my luck would have had a, first role, literally first ever job in Cambridge. And yeah, that's kind of where my journey started. So, but yeah, it wasn't like a planned thing. Even then, I was trying, because that business used to service American clients as well. And I was trying desperately to, slightly go left or go further west. But yeah, as it happens, landed in the UK and, absolutely loved it here. I feel like there's a lot more parallels between India life or Bombay life and London life as such than it is with America. So yeah, you know, been here for a while now, and yeah, no plans to go anywhere unless some twist of fate happens.
I agree. There is a lot of parallel between the Mumbai, Bombay life versus the London life. Also, I think from a geographical perspective, the proximity is also a lot closer than if you were to be in the US. So I think that also helps fundamentally. And I think time zones also. So if you look at all these things, I think the parallel also exists because it's that much more easier for people from the subcontinent to come to the UK.
Yeah, and like I went to like an Anglo-Indian school, so again, a lot of emphasis on English and those sort of things. So it was fairly, I would say, seamless in
Yeah.
terms of moving over. I think what was more interesting was because I obviously was in Cambridge for a bit, but actually started off living here in the north, and it's something which, when you look from outside, you don't see as much. So, like Yorkshire life and things. And, coming from a big, bustling city, I was in a little town called Shipley. And then, as soon as you go into North Yorkshire, you start seeing fields and sheep and things, which is, completely different world compared to busy streets of Mumbai. And honestly, if you've grown up in Mumbai, at some point you just get exhausted
Yeah.
with the number of people,
Yeah.
the sound, smells, the whole lot. And if you put someone in sort of little town in Yorkshire, you're in paradise, fundamental detox, yeah. But yeah, I mean, UK, I find, especially over the last, I would say, 10, 15 years, very welcoming to people moving over and things. I think there's a little bit, the narrative has changed maybe in the last few years because of the boats and things. But yeah, I think fundamentally, especially there's just so many Indians in the UK now. You're never too far from home.
Yeah. And do you see a difference between you and now your children? Like, I'm guessing your children are like somehow British versus how. I'm just trying to understand that because you're also technically the first person who is the first generation, but also has now the second generation. Like bringing up the second generation. Yeah. Like, is there like a parallel between the two generations?
Yeah, I mean, I would have loved to. My children are like 6 and 11, and I would have loved for them to know some Indian language, but they're hopeless Indian origin kids who only know English. They actually know a little bit of Spanish and French, but yeah, nothing much. So I'm still trying my best to get them up to speed. But yeah, I mean, we go back every now and again, so they sort of know what India is like. India itself has changed from the time I grew up because, especially some middle class people live in more, how do I put it, much, sort of the standard of living's improved a lot. So, there's some aspects which they really find enjoyable in India. sort of the quick deliveries, having people do stuff for you, having a driver at their beck and call. So they do enjoy their holidays there. But yeah, I mean, I think it's quite different for them, and I try my best not to compare myself with them. First of all, more than anything else, not even the countries, it's just a completely different era,
Yeah.
so many years apart. And like if you look at the tech age, it's completely transformed things over the last few years. So yeah, it's an interesting time for children growing up as well. But I always say this, that kids who grew up in the 90s, they've had the best time because we've sort of gradually grown up through the tech age as well. So we're not completely so we've sort of seen a bit of offline life, and then we've gradually come into online life. So we're kind of like the in-betweeners. So best of both worlds.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think I'm also biased because I grew up in the 90s. So having the best of both worlds, but also like if you look at social media, technology, a lot of base, we build that base.
Yeah.
So it's also, I think we're that much more adaptable because we didn't have it. And then we had to do that transition. I think if you compare ourselves to the generation before, obviously there's a huge disconnect in terms of how we see and adopt to technology versus our parents, for example. Like I mean, it's a night and day. But I think it's interesting that we were in that transition, so we're easily adaptable today. If you speak about AI, if you speak about AGI, whatever it may be, like that is just an okay conversation for us to have, and we can understand, and we can also keep up with that next generation, like your kids, for example. Like, I mean, your kids are very young, but I'm just thinking, like anyone in their mid 20s or late 20s or whatever, if they're talking about technology versus if they're having a conversation with you, you will still understand that conversation. Whereas if you are having a conversation with the previous generation, like your parents, there's going to be a huge disconnect. So I think that really is a big leverage point.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's just so much easier for us to balance out
Yeah.
the online versus offline lives. Whereas, someone grew up in the last 15, 20 years, they've pretty much, they've grown up into social media, TikTok, Instagram, etc. So their perspective on these things is very different. Plus, there's obviously you hear about the instances of online bullying and
Yeah,
things as well, which which isn't great. So yeah, the new times and new challenges, I would say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But it's one of those as well, right? I mean, you'll always have challenges in life. It's just that the nature of challenges keep changing as you progress. I think in our own lives and as the generations keep shifting. But hopefully new solutions as well.
100%. Yeah, that's why I would say I'm one of those people who's maybe not as worried about getting old, because surely we'd just be able to transport our mind into a new and improved body and keep going.
Definitely the lifespan is increasing. So hopefully lifespan increases, and then by then there is that element as well. Somebody needs to make it.
Yeah, definitely.
And
Clearly, I've been watching far too many sci-fi.
but I mean, if you think about it, a lot of things we used to watch as kids, sci-fi movies or Star Trek or whatever, like so many things have now come to life. Like a lot of things we see today is like so futuristic, but it's a reality. Self-driving cars and God knows what. Like even the iPhones. If you remember back in the days, we used to see things like gadgets like that in Star Trek, and now it's a reality, and we don't even think twice about it.
Yeah, for sure. It's like they say, life imitates art and art imitates life. So I think we're sort of going through that phase where a lot of stuff which was thought about in the 60s and 70s, it's actually come to life. And even beyond, like, things like video calling and things,
Yes.
they were always, shown in a lot of media, but never really done up until quite recently. So yeah, no.
So Shabbir, walk me through. Okay, so you moved to the UK. You obviously came here on a work visa. You had a job, and then you went back. Then you came back. Then what happened?
Yeah, so when I sort of came back again to the UK, I came on, what was available then was a sort of a self-sponsored visa. So it's a bit like the American or Canadian points-based visa. So I wasn't attached to any employer at the time. So I just had to be in a job. So I sort of worked my way through a few companies. And I think I would have probably been in professional work here for close to 10 years. And I got to a point where really I was, I'd done a lot of things, a lot of interesting things in the professional world, but I really wanted to found a company. In fact, I was so keen on founding a company that I got a MacBook to build an iOS app in 2014, but that never really took flight. Eventually, that same MacBook I used in 2020, 6 years later, to build, our first iOS app for a business called Cook My Grub, which then got rebranded to Flavors. So, yeah, I mean, it took me a while, but I always had that thing in my mind where I wanted to found a company and try and leverage my technological skills to build something unique used by consumers. And I was quite keen on building something in the consumer space as well, because that's really where I think my core strengths exist. If I can empathize with the person who I'm building it for, then it's a lot easier for me to build. So, which is why, hence, we had a consumer startup and not like a B2B SaaS product as such.
Before we continue on that, because you spoke about your MacBook and there was like a full circle moment in the MacBook, I also want to speak about a full circle moment. First, by starting off saying thank you, because we were doing a pre-pod call and I didn't even know, but my co-founder, Nabil. And you spoke about him because you're following me, my journey, the Plums journey, and then you spoke about him. We brought him on the call. I didn't know that you were his tutor back in the days in high school. And at one point, he was at a financial low point, his family situation, whatever. And he spoke to you and he said he can't continue with you, like the extra, tuition, and because he could not afford your fees. And then you turned around and you said, that's none of your business. I'm just going to speak to your mum. And then you continued tutoring him. And I think it's also interesting because what he said on that call, which obviously we all got emotional on the call, that he wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. So I just want to thank you from that perspective as well. And I think a lot of people, and I know you're very humble and you didn't want me to talk about this, but I think it's very important as well, because a lot of people are, somehow we criticize ourselves, but we don't take good the good things that we do in our stride. And I think it's important to vocalize that as well. So I just want to thank you for that.
No, thank you. And, as you know, Nabil, he was a very bright kid even then, and he's obviously done very well for himself. So I'm glad kind of I had that little bit to do in his life, and I'm glad he acknowledges it and recognizes it as well. So it's very very fulfilling and satisfying for me. I don't do a lot of tutoring now, but I used to do that for a few years at one point of time, and it's very satisfying for me to hear such brilliant stories. And good luck to him and you with everything you guys do. So yeah, just happy to be a little dot on his timeline.
Thank you. I mean, tutoring already, teaching the next generation is such a noble profession. And I think, you just having that thought process and just doing it, for the absolute right reason as well. I think that's just paying it forward, I think, is super important for each one of us. So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, I've done it, and I'd sort of do that every single time I get that opportunity, because, as you said, it's an opportunity for us to basically do a little bit, make sure we are giving back as well. And then, karma has a nice way of coming back to you, and
Tenfold.
you end up benefiting tenfold. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Coming back to your MacBook and now you founding Flavors. So did you always wanted to get into business, or was it because 10 years you worked in corporate and you said, okay, enough is enough? And or was there always like an entrepreneurial bug?
Yeah, I was sort of one of those kids who, I know when I was about 10, 11 years old, I would, these WWF cards had just come out back then. And I know I sort of bought a pack for just like 10 rupees, and I ended up selling 30 cards for 1 rupee each. So I made a little bit of a profit. So I always had that entrepreneurial streak. I think getting into professional life, and, once you start getting an earning, maybe it sort of died down for a bit, because then you get, there's a lot of comforts in life which come in by being in regular employment in a decently paying job. So really for me, it was, I been in the UK. I was sort of semi-established here as well. I'd done all of the checks for me to get my visa signed off at various stages, to the point where, I sort of took on British citizenship as well. And then you could say, it was, for me, it was a question of, what next, what next? And I was thinking about it, and I was actually involved in another business as well, where someone had already founded a product, but, it was only on paper. So I got involved with them for a few months. Got to learn a little bit more about, how you start a company and what are the sort of challenges you'll come up against, things like fundraising, building a team, and so on. So when the right moment presented itself, it was actually me and my friend Dinesh. We were sat in a pub, literally Christmas Eve 2019, and we were thinking about some of the challenges or problems we have in life. And both of us have children who go to the same class in the same school. So we spoke about some of those things. And we actually thought about some, like a robotics kit for children initially. And we started talking a little bit more. And then the topic became food. And, as all of us know, as busy working professionals, none of us have the time to cook a good, healthy meal. Equally, being from a migrant background, you don't have access to those, authentic ethnic meals. So, but having said that, in a place like London, at least, there's a lot of people from migrant backgrounds, and especially for those people whose partners are here and maybe they don't have access to the regular job market, they often end up doing cooking at home, and then they would try and sell within the community. So we found that as a sort of a niche in the industry, and we started talking about it a little bit more. And then there was a lady who was in our neighborhood and who did that cooking business. She's actually now, a very successful caterer as well. But going back nearly 5-6 years ago, she was also just starting up, and her food was fabulous. So at that point, we asked each other, wouldn't it be great if we built a platform like Just Eat or Deliveroo, on which all of these wonderful home cooks cooking, fresh homemade meals, a lot of them from ethnic backgrounds, if we could build a platform which supported them and fulfilled this need of busy working professionals for home cooked meals. So that's kind of where the genesis of the idea happened. And like with any business, timing is super critical. Okay, so we thought about this end of 2019, started recruiting developers, and both of us were still in full-time jobs at the time. So we started, putting the idea into a presentation, started talking to developers and recruiting them. And we had 2 developers, started building the product. And then in March 2020, we all know, the entire world turned upside down. And at that point, initially, people were really scared. But once people got used to things, what's the thing which all of us still did during COVID, right? All of us still, wanted to have amazing, great food, but restaurants were closed. So from a timing of the product, we were quite, I would say, lucky, because something which we'd conceptualized pre-COVID, suddenly, we were in the midst of a pandemic, and that was exactly what the need of the hour was. So we started doing trials and tests within the town of Maidenhead, which is where both of us lived. And we got a fantastic response. Through the second half of 2020, we had people calling us up, sort of professional chefs, caterers, others with food businesses who had completely gone out of business because of COVID, and they were calling us from Southeast London, even from the north, Birmingham, all over the place, wanting to be on our platform. And we were this little company of 2.5 people. It was me, my business partner Dinesh, and one of our friends who was working part-time with us. They all wanted to be on the platform. So that sort of gave us the impetus to, hand in resignations at our full-time job and then pursue this full-time. So yeah, it was just, I would say, good timing.
Sounds pretty exciting though. But what was it? I mean, it sounds exciting to me, but was it exciting or nerve-wracking? Because you also, now there's a pandemic, people are also losing jobs because there was a lot of layoffs at that time as well. And you're resigning. Were you married and had kids also at that time?
I did,
So
yes.
didn't, yeah, was it exciting or otherwise?
I think, with the sort of adrenaline and the rush you get from building a product and seeing the validation, you don't really think as much about all of the other stuff, like, in terms of financial considerations or, running a family and how you're going to survive. Because, you're basically going from a well-paid,
Yeah.
established professional salary
To zero.
to zero. So, to be honest, yeah, I mean, I didn't really think about a lot of that. I had some savings, but, the cost of living, it was nowhere near enough for us to survive. Um, I was somewhat fortunate that I had a partner who was in a well-paying job, so she took on some of that additional load initially. But yeah, it wasn't like, very well planned or things. It was just one of those things where right place, right time, the opportunity presented itself, and it was about, do you want to do this as a side hustle and, it just fades away, or do you want to put 100% of yourself into it and make this something quite spectacular?
I think delusionality is super important being a founder also. If you're not delusional and if you don't absolutely believe what you're going to start is going to work, actually work better than you ever thought, you'll never start.
100%. And I think what's most important is, like, first of all, when you're starting a business, you have to have 100% conviction. That is absolutely important, because otherwise you're never going to put in the hard yards or, make all those personal sacrifices or do any of the other stuff, which comes as a challenge of with being a founder. So if you have 100% conviction in your idea, then, you can potentially walk on water to try and achieve your dreams. So that's something which, was certainly something which I fully believed in. And I think just the feedback we'd get, because, the food, I know all industries are difficult, but the food industry is especially difficult because if you have a customer and if the customer's kids are hungry, even if there's a 5 minutes delay, it's not going to be a pleasant phone call when they call up customer service. So you have to get things quite right. And during those early days, we got, most things right. And, the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. So that sort of reinforced our decision to, pursue the business full time, then go on and raise funds as well in order for us to be able to scale it up.
So walk me through that journey. So that's whole scaling journey. I know you've exited now. We're going to speak about that later. But the scaling journey. So you were scaling, you've raised funds, how much did you raise? And yeah, so just that.
Yeah, so so like the two of us put in, some of our money to start with to, hire the initial developers and get the first prototype version of the app built. We, while we were building up the app as well, both of us had, something of a network where there were people who had enough funds and who were thinking about doing investments. So we, like me and my partner, both used to talk in our social circles to them. So we got some of our close friends and family to become the first angel investors in the idea. So I think in the first tranche, we raised about 70, 80K from close friends and family, in addition to the funds we put in personally. And then once we started seeing that traction and we decided to come full time into the business, we thought now it's time to properly raise funds. Through the early phase, we'd already had our first hire. So she was actually one of my wife's friends, and she struggled for a long time to find a job, and she had children, etc., and didn't have prior work experience in the UK. So she found it quite challenging, but she had a great personality, the right sort of like a community manager type of a thing, someone who got on well with people, especially with the chefs and the home cooks whom we were recruiting. She had the right skills to interact with them and bring them on board. So we'd got her in as our first hire as well. And similarly, again, so there's lots of, like, in our journey, lots of friends and family who were involved in this. So someone who was my cricket captain, so I play cricket on a Saturday as well. So Brian, who was my cricket captain in our team in 2017, and great hockey player as well, he actually was a professional chef. Oh, he ran his catering company as well. So one of the things with starting a home cooking business was the regulation, hygiene, making sure that all of the food safety standards are being followed. So because I knew Brian quite well, I was part of his cricketing team. He was one of the first people I reached out to find out a little bit more about, what are the food safety regulations, what should we be doing, what we should be avoiding, and so on. And he started talking to us, and then he ended up joining the team as well. So he was sort of our chief chef, and he did a lot of the recordings, which were distributed to all of our chefs for their trainings and so on. And he audited and made sure that from a food safety perspective, we were 100% on par with any high street restaurant or takeaway.
Before we continue, a lot of people say don't do business with friends and family. You obviously did the quite opposite. What was your experience around that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think, especially in like a startup type of environment, you need people around you whom you can trust. And I guess the advantage of having some friends and family around you is that they're people whom you can, pretty much blindly trust. So it helps during the early phase for sure. I guess once you start maturing as an organization, you want professional people to come in, and then you have established uh, ways of working as well, and that's probably where that sort of friends and family piece stops. So for us, it was exactly similar to that, where we had this kind of core team, each covering different aspects of the business. It was, four of us. And once we started seeing some traction and good numbers of users, good number of orders, and growing, as word started spreading about our service, then we decided to, look at raising funds.
I agree on the friends and family part. And I think the trust, more than you trusting them, is them trusting you. Because especially in the initial days, because I spoke about Nabil. Nabil is also my first cousin. I didn't have the money. I don't have the money to afford a co-founder or a CEO at that time. I just told him, listen, this is just an idea. I don't have money to pay you. You will have to live off your savings. But I believe that we can make this work. So it's very difficult to buy in that trust from someone who you do not know. And I think that is more important than you trusting them. I think them trusting you and your crazy idea that you're going to change the world.
100%. And yeah, I mean, I think, with a lot of these things, it's also about what's the idea you're pursuing, and are they able to, like I spoke about me being able to empathize with my customer. It's equally about them. Do they actually understand what you're trying to build? And do they think they can add that value as well? So that helps, sort of additionally give them that confidence that by joining forces with you, they're going to be able to go on a journey which would be hopefully fulfilling for all of us.
Yeah. So the timeline. So then things started kicking off. Are you still in COVID? So you're hiring more people. What was the highest peak of flavors? And so you've raised funds. What was the team size? And yeah, so let's come to that.
Yeah, so I think at one point, with a mix of permanent staff and contract staff, there were about 26 of us. And we didn't used to keep count of staff. I mean, we had an org structure and things, but every time I would add an extra Microsoft license, because we use Teams, I'd tell my co-founder, now we're at 23, now we're at 24. So 26 was like the biggest we had. There were about 14, 15 of us in the UK. And then, we were actually quite a geographically diverse team. So we had developers all the way from Canada to China and everything in between. Even one of our lead developers was actually based in Norway as well. So I think we probably didn't have anyone in the southern hemisphere. But otherwise, from the time I used to wake up at 6, 7 a.m. to late at night, I'd start off with saying good morning to the guy from China and say good night to the guy from Canada. So yeah, it was good, and I think that a lot, COVID changed so many things, isn't it?
Yeah.
We used to all go into the office, and then suddenly we weren't going into the office, and that meant small businesses like mine had access to talent, you know, anywhere across the world as long as they could write code or do the job. We could work with them. So it was an interesting time.
So then the shift. Now, obviously, you've exited. So then, what was the catalyst to that, and then what led you to that next
Yeah.
phase of the journey?
Yeah, sure. So I think maybe, while, as we were, I would say, kind of like a business which flourished during COVID, as we started coming out of COVID, we started seeing a few challenges. So we actually did a pretty significant pivot where we went from a local hot food delivery business to a national chilled meal delivery business. And the idea there was, as people went back into the offices and outdoors, they wouldn't be able to eat their meals just in time, like a hot meal delivery. And they obviously have the mainstream platforms as well to order from nearby restaurants. But the clear USP for us was the world cuisine or the ethnic meals. And that's something which couldn't be replaced by what's in your neighborhood. Because if you think about a typical British town or city, in your vicinity, in most places, London's slightly different, but in most places in the UK, you probably have like, a chippy curry house, bad Italian and bad Chinese. That's your choice. So we were still very relevant for a lot of people outside, the sort of highly dense and ethnically diverse places like London. So we decided to pivot to a chilled meals strategy. So it was still the wonderful home cooked meal, but instead of it being delivered by a delivery person in the locality, it was now being packed in a chilled box and being delivered nationally. So we did that major pivot, and that's kind of like the second half of what the business was doing. We still had a very small presence, still in hometown of Maidenhead, where we continued with the hot food delivery service. There, the business just ran itself because we had a pretty solid captive market. But beyond that, for us to be able to scale as well, we looked at the national delivery option.
So the chilled option, is it similar to like all these meal prep services where you get 3 meals or 5 meals per week? You store them in the fridge, you take them out, microwave, and you're done.
Yeah, exactly that. Except this wasn't on a subscription model, so you have the choice to order, let's say, Indian one week and Chinese the next, and even things like Lithuanian and Latvian, Eastern European foods, Senegalese, African food, Thai food, the whole lot. So because we were then able to start onboarding chefs from sort of a broader geographical base, the cuisine choice increased as well. Operationally, it was a nightmare.
I was just going to think, actually, I should have asked you this question before, but you were not operating as a cloud kitchen. Like so you were delivering, packing, distributing, whilst they were preparing the food within their own kitchens? Or was it like a centralized kitchen that you guys already...
Yes, so we worked in a completely stockless model, so a bit like Uber.
Got it.
So it was pure, platform play, peer-to-peer.
Got it.
Because packing chilled food isn't straightforward, every chef who wanted to onboard onto the national delivery program, essentially, they had to go through a set of training and a few dry runs with us, or a few test runs with us. So what that meant was, I was getting regular deliveries of wonderful, delicious meal as part of testing the onboarding of each chef. So they would we'd supply them with the packaging, and then they would have things like everything from, the boxes, ice packs, insulation, all of that with them. So every time they got an order, They would pack it up. They'd been trained how to pack it safely as well. And then we are actually, back then and even now, no one else is still doing it. We were one of the few people who were doing national peer-to-peer delivery. So we had agreements with the major national couriers or delivery companies such that they would pick up from the chef and deliver to the customer without the food ever coming to us or us getting in the way in any shape or form. So quite different from
So you can drop shipping for food, in a way.
exactly, but and it
Amazing.
was being picked up from the chef's house.
Amazing. Okay, so so it sounds very interesting, by the way, and I'm also thinking like that. Now this conversation is making me hungry. I haven't had lunch. I should have had lunch before speaking to you, but it's such an interesting model. Also, if you apply the drop shipping element, I think it's just genius. So then what happened? Now you're obviously exited and you're not no longer running the business, but why?
Yeah, so fundamentally by the end of 2022, we'd raised about 1.5 million plus or minus few thousand. And there were, we had made some predictions of where we needed to be in 2023. Having done the pivot and having, sort of being in a completely different world. So at that point, not only was it people going back into the offices and, sort of some of the reasons why we were successful with people being at home, those didn't exist anymore. What had also happened was that the war in Ukraine had started, so all of the costs of the ingredients went up. Gas prices went up. So as a result, the cost per dish started going up, and at the same time, there was just generally a negative economic outlook across the globe. And fundamentally, investors were starting to fall out of love of consumer startups. Everyone wanted to basically back predictable B2B, startups, ideally SaaS platforms as well. So we started, sort of coming up against lots of these challenges. So investor sentiment towards consumer startup was poor. A lot of, I would say, COVID businesses had boomed during COVID and then just completely crashed after COVID. And at the same time, the cost per dish started going up. So we started coming up across a lot of these challenges, and we weren't able to hit some of the forecasted metrics. So it started becoming increasingly more and more hard for us to raise the next round of funding, which would probably have been like a Series A type fundraise. We were still able to, sell the idea to angel investors and I would say sort of not small VCs as well. But it looked like the ticket size was going to be less than $1 million. And we'd reached a stage where we needed to raise at least 4 to 5 million in order for us to be able to move the dial. But sometimes it's a chicken and egg situation, right? You need the funds to scale, and a lot of investors will only invest in you if you've already scaled a certain amount. So we ended up being in that sort of death valley where, often startups end up, sort of getting pushed into, and, some come out flying and others don't survive. So then we were faced with some challenges. My co-founder had to move out of the business as well. So then it was just me flying solo with some of my team. So just generally it became quite difficult for us to keep going with the business. So then we started pursuing our options because, we still had investors who needed to be paid back. So we started looking at basically pursuing an exit or a sale. And we went through some of the usual competitors. And at the end, it basically became a completely watered down transaction in order to pay off some of the creditors and things. So we ended up exiting to a fantastic business. They raised a lot more than us, and they're sort of a well-seasoned leadership team, and they've already had one exit in the food domain. So we migrated all of our customers over to them, and then we had to unfortunately say goodbye and move on, I guess.
I think it's a very important topic to speak about. If you think about social media obviously romanticizes the whole startup world and how sexy it is to start a company and even if you look at the difficult times are also somehow um, positioned in a versus Goliath type of narrative. But the reality is, like, a lot of COVID businesses, maybe not just COVID businesses, businesses in general, post COVID took a hit. The economic downturn, as we all know, I mean, it's not only your business; every business under the sun was affected by that. The risk appetite for investors just reduced, and yeah, I think fundamentally it was difficult for any startup to raise money at that period. And if there was lack of runway, or if fundamentally you were not hitting the targets, I think most businesses struggled, and a lot of businesses did sadly, run out of gas, and then they just had to shut down. We actually had a lot of our partners as well. Some of them had to file for bankruptcy and did not even get the chance to even do a fire sale, for instance. So I think it was a tough time all around, but I think it's also important for us to maybe acknowledge that this is just a part of business. First of all, it's a part of life. I think a piece of peaks and troughs. But I think this is one of the most important fundamentals of business. If you look at the largest players out there, from Tesla to Apple to whoever, I mean, we've gone through this so many times where I was so stressed that I knew I don't have enough money to make bank for salaries, and that's like one of the shittiest position to be in as a founder or a CEO. But I think that's the reality or nature of any business. A lot of businesses today that are like these large businesses changing the world, they've gone through stages where they were almost about to be bankrupt and be out of the system. So just around that, what does one do? Like, I mean, what were you thinking about? I mean, and also on top of that, I didn't know that your co-founder also exited. We don't need to get into the reasons why he exited, but I think the few catalysts of a business to then, I think fail is the wrong word, but I think for it to not exist anymore. Cash, you run out of cash, but I think the founder co-founder dynamics is also super important. So if you can just run me through what is happening in your mind at that time, and obviously it's a very stressful situation to be in. We spoke about it initially, where emotionally is draining because it's your baby, and you've made this from ground up, and like you're so emotionally attached to everything, and then you just have to let go of that baby, not by your choice. If you're having an exit and you've deliberately positioned and primed yourself for that exit, that's a different story. But this is, I can imagine, emotionally draining. So what's happening in your mind, and what was more difficult? Was the running out of cash or losing the co-founder?
I think it was just like, I guess with a lot of these things, once you hit that downward spiral, it just goes from bad to worse, isn't it? So a lot of negative things happened during that phase, but there were a few green shoots as well which sprung up along the way. So we had after waiting and waiting for nearly 9 months, we were confirmed we were going to be on air on Dragon's Den. And can you imagine, for like a business which for all practical purposes was on its last legs, getting that opportunity to be on television in front of 3 or 4 million people watching at home, that was something which kind of kept me going, because I knew there would be some sort of an impact of getting that the PR push or that publicity with such a massive audience. I mean, if I think back to our journey, early 2021, we were name checked on BBC in a news article about the rise of home cooking food businesses, and that day itself, our website had close to 50,000 hits, which was phenomenal. And it's not even like the article was about us; it was just we were mentioned as one of the companies facilitating home cooking businesses. But at that point, we were only serving the area of Maidenhead. So we couldn't really leverage that or benefit from it. And so we'd gone through that already, having had that, you could call it like a missed opportunity of getting that level of coverage, but not being able to materialize it commercially. So we really built up ourselves. The thing with the BBC is, even if you go and shoot on Dragon's Den, you're not necessarily confirmed to be on television. It does need to be TV worthy. So, obviously someone at the BBC would have seen our clips and maybe thought we were TV worthy. But yeah, I mean, nearly like a year to date is when we managed to come on the BBC, and immediately after that show, we had a massive spike. So I know, like, because the show airs on a Thursday, and then through Thursday, Friday, Saturday, these 3 days, every single day we were doing record-breaking sales. So even while, we'd reached a point where I was just trying to keep the business going so that we could, let's see what happens with the TV event, and then we'll take a call. So that kind of that gave us enough number of new customers to go on for a few more months. But now, looking back in hindsight, there were, fundamentally a few problems with the business, which was, more specifically to do with the operational elements, just the way everything was structured with trying to deliver food nationally. It's very, very hard, and especially hard if you're not doing it, you're trusting a third party to do it. So, plus when you start operating at a certain scale, some of those elements become even more visible, which when you're at a smaller number of orders, maybe gets hidden a bit. So if I was to give you an example, doing 20 orders a day, and if you have a 10% failure rate, that's just 2 orders or 2 disappointed customers. When you supersize that out to 2,000 orders a day, and then you've suddenly got 200 customers who are net negative promoters of the business. So some of those sort of things started becoming more and more obvious. We could have maybe made some additional changes and things, but at that point, like I said, I was flying solo, running out of funds, and I just, was at the point of burnout, and I thought, what, it's time to throw in the towel, time to pursue options, pass on ownership to someone else, and then sort of move on to other things.
You think if the split with the founder, and if you had more runway, you would have continued, or you would have anyway said, okay, let me exit maybe exit in a better position than just to continue going and then bring me to the position where, I have no choice but to exit.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe if we had some more funds in the bank account, and if we had, sort of more leadership in place, because, sort of the sole leader left in the business with, a few people helping me operationally. So if we had a little bit of that leadership, some more funds in the bank, then we could have pursued some other mini pivots, maybe, run it out of our own kitchen for a bit, get chefs to come in and cook in our own kitchen, package it more thoroughly or more professionally, should I say. And then we could have had another shot, but it was just one of those things where we'd already gone on for close to 3.5 years operating as a business. It was too little too late.
It's also interesting because you said there was a spike after moving on to Dragon's Den. I should have actually brought that up even before, but I think that in itself is like a big win, because how many people apply, and then from that, how many people, like you rightly said, actually get aired. So there was definitely merit. Did you get investment from the Dragons or no?
We didn't get investment from the Dragons, but
you got the PR.
We got the PR, and a lot of our pitch was geared up towards appealing not to the Dragons as much, but appealing to the TV audience.
Got it.
So
that was the strategy as well.
That was the strategy, yeah. And obviously we'd raised funds at, a sort of significantly higher valuation. And if we would have taken a Dragons valuation,
a down round, obviously,
then not only would it have been a down round, but even our existing investors would have been very displeased with that.
Sure.
So, yeah, I mean, it would have been great if we'd have got investment, but equally there would have been another set of problems for us trying to answer to all those investors why we took on at such a lower valuation. So, yeah, I mean, the entire Dragon's Den strategy, and we were part of an accelerator at that time, and we were really well supported by the accelerator. It's called Unrest, and they helped us gear up our pitch, practice the pitch, and make sure that we're hitting those right notes to appeal to the TV audience.
So when there's a spike, because you got the PR opportunity and then there's a spike, and every single day you're saying, the numbers are just hitting. So obviously, from there's obviously validation. So I think maybe so the model works. There is a demand for the model, but what you lacked was maybe operations, funding. I don't know enough. We also spoke about this before we started the pod. How important, like your brand is so important, your personal brand or your company brand. So I think, do you think if you had enough branding, like the meat behind branding, things would have been different?
Yeah, so so funny enough, like, branding, it was always like a big part of the business, especially being consumer facing. So we used to be called Cook My Grub, and we'd always got, sort of good feedback, not so good feedback on the branding, um, and things. But then when we were on the show, Steve Bartlett was very pointed with his feedback. And then, when we came back off having done the shoot, we started reflecting, like, what should we do? And, again, being part of that accelerator and having access to like a world-class design studio, we ended up doing the rebrand to flavors. So with flavors, if you look at the colors and things, there was a very clear emphasis on the diversity in world cuisine. Whereas with Cook My Grub, it was more plain, safer colors. So, greens and light blues. Whereas with flavors, it was, the bright pinks, bright oranges, bright yellows. So really trying to increase the volume on that sort of diversity and ethnically diverse cuisine. And it was being done by, professionals. So it wasn't sort of like a half-baked effort. So yeah, so that's kind of where, the flavors pivot came in as well. We also got in a freelance marketing consultant who helped us with that transition. And yeah, it would have been great to have, maybe have done that a bit earlier, maybe have done it before we went on Dragon's Den. At one point, we thought Stephen Bartlett was going to invest. He was really bought into the idea. He said his mom used to be a private chef,
Oh wow.
and we on the show on set we'd taken a Caribbean chef who'd made jerk chicken, and he said the jerk chicken tasted exactly like how his mom would make.
Oh,
So we got some serious compliments on there, and I think just generally even like Peter Jones, he's from Maidenhead as well, so he was super enthusiastic having a Maidenhead based startup come on the show. So there was lots going there because the amounts like I said, we'd already raised about 1.5, and if you watch the show, it's still on air or still on iPlayer. If you watch the show, Tuka Silliman, he really shreds us on the valuation and the amount of funds we've raised. So, which is always the case. If you raise funds and you go on Dragon's Den, it's like you're going to be easy pickings. But yeah, I mean, in any case, for us, it was mission accomplished. And then it was just a case of like, how do we make the most of this publicity or PR off the back of the show?
I should maybe have a separate segment on how did you get on Dragon's Den and what's the process. But coming to the exit, I think maybe that's something also interesting, but also very important, because a lot of people are generally, if you look at most of the content out there, people are talking about how do you start a business, how do you scale a business. But in a situation like this, how do you actually exit? Like, I mean, what's the process? Where did you start? Did you have, and what were the conversations with your stakeholders, with your investors? Like, I mean, was it difficult? Did you have their support?
I think it's very important that, for any business, you have the right buyer for whom, strategically it makes sense to acquire the business as well. So we already had a bit of a network, and I think we were quite keen on pursuing a sale to an American business which had exactly the same model as what we had. The only difference was they'd raised about $150 million in their journey, and they were still sitting on, a lot of funds from off the back of that raise. So for them, entering London would have been ideal. So I was in a sort of prolonged discussions with them. They were very, very interested. to the point where they got their general counsel involved as well, and they started looking at some of the numbers and forecasts and things, and just generally looking at the London market. Um, in the end, for us, it came down to that would have been the ideal scenario. But if not them, then who? So then we started looking at, who's in UK, who's in Europe, for whom it would make sense to acquire this sort of a food business where it's very much like peer to peer from in a what you could call previously unorganized sector of home cooking. But yeah, I mean, we found home cooks, and even they took a long time. It's just one of those things where everyone was trying to keep their
Yeah, yeah.
pounds or their dollars close to their chest. And yeah, I mean, in the end, we were able to get that going. So I think the key bit there is even before you think about a sale or anything, it's so important to have that network and sort of be already keep those key companies or potential future acquirers in the know and keep them up to date with what your business is doing, because you can't turn up to another business and say, "Oh, hey, buy me or buy these assets of mine," if they've never heard of you. um, so again, there it's something where, especially in the UK, having been on Dragon's Den, people have seen you, they're aware of what your business is. That certainly gives you a leg up in conversations as well. Um, and yeah, I mean, at one point, I actually got in, and this is before we were even thinking of sale, when we were in a growth phase, I got a call from someone from Uber and from their corporate office in New York. And I thought, wow, this is going to be a good one. But yeah, it's like, we had eyes on us from everywhere. Um, Maybe if our numbers would have been better, then, I would have probably turned up in a Ferraris for this podcast today. But, that's how it is, I guess.
So, when you're contacting these companies, like who are you contacting? Are you contacting the CEO or are you contacting their investors or?
Yeah, I think, I mean, in our case, I was, I already had those contacts into the CEOs in these
Okay.
companies. So, um, what initially, and we weren't actually looking immediately for an exit then. We were looking at more of a, especially with the Americans, more of a, we're both in the same industry, similar challenges. Let's talk, and, it'll be good to do a knowledge share or share any best practices, good ideas. So that's kind of how some of those discussions began. Um, and then with the larger companies, obviously, like, in the Uber scenario, there's people in their corporate strategy teams who are maybe looking at interesting businesses, and they're probably the ones to, I mean, if you're lucky, they'll reach out to you. Otherwise, you kind of reach out to them.
It's interesting how you said it's nice. It's always good to be in that radar. Would you advise people or founders who are not even thinking of an exit today to always somehow think of an exit every single time, and from that perspective, position yourself in the in, like, I mean, yeah, position yourself from a place where all these players, the potential buyers, always know you? Like, I mean, is that a strategy that people should apply anyway?
Yeah, I think, just generally being the CEO of a growing business, you have to do a lot of networking, as I'm sure you do. And I think, as important as it is to go to, investor related events and things, it's equally important to go to industry, sort of industry events in the same domain. So, like, for example, I knew a lot of the founders in the other food startups as well. So that's just something which I think, as the sort of key founder, you need to do anyway. And, you're always talking to other businesses. Sometimes, most of the time, I found, because I'm fundamentally from a tech background, I was giving them advice on how to improve either their tech stacks or their email marketing pipelines and so on. But equally, you get back as well. And then, when the right time comes, those people will then be back with introductions to other founders whom they know, who are probably in a more um, in a better position financially. And I mean, if you think about it this way, it's a two-way street, isn't it? So sometimes you're either looking to get acquired, or equally you're looking at, because I mean we did this a lot as well when we were really peaking, was looking at other businesses where we could have a strategic partnership with them and have them pivot their business to help favor us, but at the same time we're giving them bulk business, so it works for them as well. And then we always had various companies similar to us, but who either weren't able to fundraise or able to grow, who were looking for an exit and looking to sell to us. So it was something which is quite ongoing. um, and depending on what stage the business is, you're either on one side of the table or the other side of the table. So I would say that's part and parcel of a CEO's job, where they have to be in the game as such, and know who they should be acquiring or who are potential acquirers in the future.
Yeah, and then that conversation obviously can open doors to multiple other conversations depending on the stage or circumstances that you're in. But yeah, 100%. I think networking is the key. As they say, your net worth is your network. But I think here fundamentally, sometimes it can also become your lifeline. So that's super important. If you were to go back now, let's say a couple of years when that decision had to be made, but let's say you've done your Series A, you've raised 5 million, you still have the leadership team with you. What would have you been doing differently?
I think for sure one of the things which we learned eventually was, in the food business, it's quite important to have your own setup as well. And if you look at any of the other successful food delivery businesses, like if you look at Deliveroo as well, they a lot of their growth came off the back of their Deliveroo edition kitchens, when they had licensed recipes from some of the top restaurants, and they were sort of making them out of their own controlled environments in very targeted areas as well. So that's certainly something which we would have done. In fact, that was always part of the plans, but we never quite had, I would say, the funds definitely, but because neither me or my co-founder were food industry experts, we never had the courage to take that leap of faith and start an actual physical cloud kitchen which would be dishing out meals. So that's certainly something, in hindsight, I think, given time and given the right funds in place, we would have tried out.
So what's next for Shabbir? What are you doing now?
At the moment, I'm doing some freelance consulting, contracting as a techie. We're still fortunate enough to, be able to go out and with some effort get a contract. So I'm doing some contracting work at the moment. But I've really got my sights set on a few key technologies. I think I'm a bit late to the AI game. So yeah, I think that ship has sailed. But what really fascinates me is spatial computing. So augmented reality, virtual reality, the metaverse was a big thing maybe a couple of years ago. It seems to have died down. But if you look at the progression of display technologies and things, you've gone all the way from little Nokia phones with small black and white screens to, these fantastic high resolution mobile displays. So augmented reality or virtual reality, that's the next frontier. The way the metaverse was positioned previously was, all of us having those big glasses or goggles or however you want to call them, headsets. But if you start looking at some of the stuff coming out more recently, like Ray-Ban's Meta glasses and things, I think that's something which really interests me. Whether or not I'll end up building in that area, I don't know. But I have purchased an Oculus or a Meta Quest, so we'll see how that goes.
I remember the first time putting on because I have one as well. I remember the first time putting on that. I was in awe. I was also pretty scared as well. I think it's one of those. I'm sure there's a phobia. I don't know what it's called, but it was surreal. Like the whole space was surreal. But I also feel from a utility perspective, how can we? And I think Apple tried to do that as well, but I don't know what happened to them, because I was pretty excited when Apple was introducing that, and I thought, okay, now the utility, you can come into your day-to-day work life, because now a lot of people work remotely. You still have that screen. You're limited with your keyboard and whatever. And how can we bring that? But I think the headset, just wearing the headset, I think for a long period of time, I think that also fundamentally doesn't work. So maybe there's a few flaws from a hardware perspective as well, but things are changing. I saw quite recently there was a podcast I heard from Snapchat, CEO of Snapchat. I think they've also introduced Snap glasses, and I think it's
Yes.
something similar. So I think the world is going towards that direction, and I think maybe your children will look back and be surprised how you were just continuously looking on your phone and you're just leaning down, and versus how they operate, technology would be completely different.
Yeah, like a blend of the real and virtual world. That would be fun. I don't think there's like, it was quite obvious when the Apple iPhone came out that that's going to be the direction of travel for the next 15, 20 years. And that's exactly what's happened. I think with the glasses piece, we don't know if it's going to be glasses, is it going to be lenses, is it going to be something completely different, like a Minority Report style floating screen. Who knows? So yeah, I mean, I'm sort of a bit of a geek as well, and I love sort of the upcoming technology. So we'll see what happens, and yeah, I'd want to be involved in something cool and cutting edge.
Amazing. Well, Shabir, I wish you all the best. You've developed something in the past. I'm sure you're going to do something amazing in the future as well. And hopefully next time when I have you on the pod, we'll be talking about your new business and how you're changing the world from that perspective. But until then, yeah, this was just amazing.
It was great chatting to you, and thanks so much for having me here. And best wishes to you and the Plum team as well on your future plans.
Thank you once again for helping Nabil out.
Thank you.